When most people think of a Navy SEAL, they picture a towering figure of muscle and determination. When they think of rescue missions in hostile territory, they imagine elite male commandos carrying wounded comrades to safety. But what happens when the rescuer stands barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighs less than 120 pounds, and happens to be a woman that most people would overlook in a crowd? What happens when the impossible becomes reality, and the smallest person in the unit becomes the biggest hero of the day? This is not a Hollywood fantasy. This is not a fictional tale designed to inspire. This is the raw, unfiltered account of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a combat medic whose actions on a single day in the mountains of Afghanistan redefined what courage looks like and shattered every preconceived notion about strength, determination, and the human spirit. In a world where size often determines respect and gender dictates expectations, Maria's story stands as a testament to the fact that true heroism knows no boundaries. Her journey from a quiet neighborhood in San Antonio to the unforgiving peaks of the Hindu Kush would challenge everything the military thought they knew about physical limitations and mental fortitude. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos checked her medical supplies for the third time. At 26 years old, she had already completed 2 tours of duty, but something about this particular mission felt different. The intelligence reports were sketchy, the terrain was notoriously difficult, and the enemy activity in the region had increased dramatically over the past week. Maria stood barely 5'2" in her combat boots, a fact that had followed her throughout her military career like an unwelcome shadow. From the moment she first stepped foot in basic training, drill sergeants had questioned whether someone of her stature belonged in combat operations. Fellow soldiers had made jokes, some good-natured, others less so, about her ability to carry her own weight in a firefight. But Maria had learned long ago that doubt from others could either crush you or fuel you, and she had chosen to let it burn as motivation. Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family in San Antonio, Maria had always been the smallest. Her 3 older brothers towered over her, and neighborhood kids often mistook her for being several years younger than her actual age. But what Maria lacked in physical size, she made up for in determination and an almost stubborn refusal to accept limitations that others tried to place on her. Her father, Roberto Santos, had served in the army during the Gulf War, and the stories he told around the dinner table had planted seeds of military ambition in young Maria's mind. Unlike her brothers, who were more interested in sports and cars, Maria found herself drawn to her father's tales of brotherhood, sacrifice, and service to something greater than oneself. When she announced during her senior year of high school that she'd planned to enlist, her family's reaction was mixed. Her mother, Elena, worried constantly about her youngest child's safety. Her brothers alternately teased her about being too small for military life and expressed grudging admiration for her determination. But her father simply nodded and said, "Mihai, the military doesn't need more big soldiers. It needs more soldiers with big hearts." Basic training at Fort Sam Houston had been a crucible that tested every aspect of Maria's character. The physical challenges were exactly what she had expected them to be: brutal, and designed to weed out those who lacked the mental fortitude to push through pain and exhaustion. What she hadn't expected was the way her size would become both a liability and an unexpected advantage. During obstacle course training, Maria struggled with some of the challenges that required upper body strength. Pull-ups were a particular nemesis, and she spent countless hours after official training ended working on building the muscle mass she needed to meet the minimum requirements. But she discovered that her smaller frame allowed her to navigate tight spaces that larger soldiers found difficult, and her lower center of gravity gave her advantages in certain types of movement and balance exercises. More importantly, Maria found that her natural empathy and communication skills made her particularly well-suited for medical training. While other soldiers focused on weapons and tactics, Maria threw herself into learning everything she could about field medicine, trauma care, and the delicate art of keeping people alive under the worst possible circumstances. Her instructors noticed her dedication quickly. Sergeant First Class Williams, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of experience, pulled her aside after a particularly intense training exercise involving simulated battlefield casualties. "Santos," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "I've seen a lot of medics come and go. Some are technically proficient but lack the instincts. Others have great instincts but can't handle the pressure. You've got something different. You've got the technical skills, the instincts, and something else that's harder to define. Don't let anyone tell you that your size disqualifies you from serving where you're needed most." Those words would echo in Maria's mind throughout her training and into her first deployment. Advanced individual training for combat medics was intense, covering everything from basic wound treatment to complex surgical procedures that might need to be performed under fire.
Maria excelled in every aspect of the training, often staying late to practice procedures until they became second nature. Her fellow trainees began to see past her diminutive stature as they watched her work.
During one particularly challenging exercise involving a simulated mass casualty event, Maria had managed to treat and stabilize 4 wounded soldiers while larger, ostensibly stronger trainees struggled to manage even 2 patients effectively. The key, Maria discovered, was efficiency of movement and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure.
Where others might panic or become overwhelmed by the chaos of a medical emergency, Maria seemed to find a zone of focused concentration that allowed her to work with precision and speed that impressed even her most skeptical instructors. Her first deployment to Afghanistan came 18 months after she completed her initial training.
The forward operating base where she was stationed sat in a valley surrounded by mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The landscape was beautiful in its starkness, but also unforgiving in ways that Maria was only beginning to understand.
The base housed approximately 300 soldiers from various units, including a small contingent of special operations forces that kept largely to themselves. Maria was assigned to the base medical facility, a collection of prefabricated buildings and tents that served as everything from routine sick call to emergency trauma surgery. Her supervising physician, Captain Jennifer Wright, was an emergency medicine doctor from Chicago who had volunteered for deployment despite having lucrative civilian opportunities waiting for her back home. Captain Wright took Maria under her wing immediately, recognizing in the young medic the same dedication to healing that had driven her own career choices. The thing about being a medic in a place like this, Captain Wright explained during one of their late-night conversations in the medical tent, is that you're going to see things that will challenge everything you think you know about medicine, about human nature, and about yourself. Some medics get overwhelmed by the responsibility. Others become hardened by it. The best ones find a way to maintain their humanity while developing the skills and mental toughness they need to save lives under impossible circumstances.
Maria absorbed every lesson, both formal and informal, that came her way. She learned how to treat gunshot wounds, how to perform emergency amputations, how to manage pain when morphine supplies were running low, and how to make impossible decisions about which patients could be saved and which were beyond help. But perhaps more importantly, she learned how to earn the respect of soldiers who initially saw her as too small, too young, and too inexperienced to be trusted with their lives. The breakthrough came during her 3rd month at the base, when a convoy returning from a routine patrol was hit by an improvised explosive device just 2 miles from the base perimeter. The explosion had been devastating. 3 soldiers were killed instantly, and 5 others were critically wounded. The base's emergency response team raced to the scene, with Maria serving as the primary medic for the evacuation helicopter. What they found when they arrived was carnage that would have overwhelmed many experienced medical professionals. Maria's response was immediate and instinctive. While others assessed the scene and tried to determine the best approach, she was already moving among the wounded, performing rapid triage assessments and beginning treatment on the most critically injured soldiers. Her small size allowed her to crawl inside the damaged vehicle to reach a soldier who was trapped and bleeding heavily from a severed artery in his leg. Working in a space barely large enough for her body, with smoke and dust limiting her visibility, Maria managed to locate the source of the bleeding and apply a tourniquet that undoubtedly saved the soldier's life. She then directed the other members of the response team in extracting the wounded man while she moved on to the next casualty. By the time the helicopters arrived to evacuate the wounded to the larger medical facility at Bagram Airfield, Maria had stabilized all 5 surviving casualties and had earned something that couldn't be taught or awarded: the complete confidence of every soldier at the base. Word of her actions spread quickly through the close-knit community of the forward operating base. Soldiers who had previously referred to her as the little medic began calling her by name. More importantly, they began seeking her out not just for medical issues but for the kind of quiet conversation that helped them process the stress and fear that were constant companions in their dangerous environment. Maria found that her role was evolving beyond simple medical care. Soldiers would find excuses to visit the medical tent, ostensibly for minor complaints but really seeking reassurance from someone who had proven herself under fire. She discovered that healing involved much more than treating wounds and dispensing medication. It required understanding the unique psychological pressures that came with combat deployment and finding ways to help soldiers maintain their mental health in an environment that constantly tested their resilience. Her reputation began to extend beyond the base as well. Other units in the region began specifically requesting Maria's presence for operations that carried higher than normal medical risks. Special operations teams, typically reluctant to work with personnel they hadn't trained with extensively,
started asking for her by name when planning missions that might require immediate medical support in hostile territory. It was during this period that Maria first encountered the Navy SEALs, who would later play such a crucial role in her story. A 4-man SEAL team had been temporarily stationed at the base while conducting operations against high-value targets in the surrounding mountains. Unlike the Army and Marine units that made up the majority of the base population, the SEALs kept largely to themselves, maintaining the mystique that surrounded Special Operations Forces. The team leader, Senior Chief Petty Officer David Richardson, was a 12-year veteran of the SEALs whose reputation preceded him even to remote forward operating bases in Afghanistan. At 6'3" and weighing nearly 230 pounds, Richardson embodied everything that people expected from an elite Special Operations soldier. His teammates, Petty Officers Jake Morrison, Anthony Torres, and Marcus Webb, were similarly impressive physical specimens who carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from years of training and successful operations. Maria's first interaction with the SEAL team came when Morrison injured his shoulder during a training exercise.
The injury wasn't serious enough to require evacuation, but it needed evaluation and treatment to ensure it wouldn't compromise the team's operational readiness. Morrison approached the medical tent with obvious reluctance, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of seeking treatment for what he considered a minor problem. When Maria introduced herself as the medic who would be examining his shoulder, Morrison's expression was polite but skeptical. He had worked with military medics before, and while he respected their training, he had never worked with one who looked like she should still be in high school. The examination revealed a partial separation of Morrison's acromyoclavicular joint, an injury that would require several weeks of limited activity to heal properly. Maria explained the diagnosis and treatment plan with the kind of professional competence that gradually changed Morrison's expression from skepticism to attention. "You know," Morrison said as Maria finished wrapping his shoulder with an elastic bandage designed to provide support while allowing limited movement, "I've been treated by a lot of medics over the years. Most of them are technically competent, but they don't really understand what we do or what we need to be able to do our job. You seem different." Maria looked up from the paperwork she was completing for Morrison's treatment record.
"What do you mean?"
"You asked about our operational tempo, about what kind of physical demands I would be facing over the next few weeks, about whether we had any missions planned that might require extended periods of carrying heavy loads. Most medics just tell you to take it easy and come back if it gets worse. You understand that taking it easy isn't always an option in our line of work." The conversation that followed was the beginning of a professional relationship that would evolve into mutual respect and, eventually, the kind of trust that can only be forged through shared adversity. Over the following weeks, as Morrison's shoulder healed and the SEAL team prepared for their next operation, Maria found herself serving as an unofficial medical advisor for their mission planning. The SEALs were impressed by her ability to anticipate medical challenges that might arise during operations and suggest preventive measures that could minimize risks without compromising mission effectiveness. More importantly, they recognized in her the same commitment to excellence and attention to detail that defined their own approach to their work. Senior Chief Richardson pulled Maria aside one afternoon as his team was preparing for a particularly challenging operation in the mountains north of the base. "Santos," he said, using the formal tone that he typically reserved for official business, "my team has worked with a lot of support personnel over the years. Some are competent, some are exceptional, and a very few are the kind of people you'd trust with your life in any situation. You fall into that last category. If we ever find ourselves in a situation where we need serious medical support in hostile territory, you're the one we'd want watching our backs." The compliment meant more to Maria than Richardson could have known. Earning the respect of elite soldiers like the SEALs validated everything she had worked for since enlisting. But more than that, it represented a recognition that her value to the mission had nothing to do with her physical size and everything to do with her competence, her dedication, and her ability to perform under pressure. As her first deployment neared its end, Maria had established herself as one of the most trusted and capable medics in the region. Her small stature, which had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, had become largely irrelevant in the face of her proven abilities. She had saved lives, earned the respect of her peers, and found a sense of purpose that she had never experienced in civilian life. But Maria's story was far from over. Her first deployment had been challenging and rewarding, but it had also been relatively conventional in terms of the medical situations she had faced. The wounded soldiers she had treated were victims of improvised explosive devices, small arms fire, and the various accidents that were inevitable in a war zone. She had not yet faced the kind of extreme situation that would test every aspect of her training, her character, and her physical capabilities. That test was waiting for her in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, where a routine operation would go catastrophically wrong, and where her reputation as a small soldier with a big heart would be put to the ultimate test. The lessons she had learned, the relationships she had built, and the confidence she had gained during her first deployment would all prove crucial when she found herself facing an impossible choice: abandon a wounded comrade or attempt a rescue that would require her to accomplish something that seemed physically impossible. The stage was being set for a day that would change not only Maria's life but the way the entire military community thought about heroism, determination, and the power of refusing to accept that something can't be done simply because it has never been done before. Maria's second deployment to Afghanistan began 18 months after her return from her first tour. The intervening time had been spent in advanced medical training at various military installations across the United States, where she had honed her skills in combat trauma care and earned certifications that placed her among the top 5% of combat medics in the Army.
The Maria Santos who returned to Afghanistan was different from the uncertain young woman who had first deployed. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven herself under fire and knew exactly what she was capable of accomplishing.
Her reputation had preceded her to the new forward operating base, and she found herself immediately integrated into the medical team as a senior medic with primary responsibility for special operations support. The base itself was located in one of the most challenging environments in Afghanistan. Situated at an elevation of nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, it was surrounded by peaks that rose even higher, creating a natural fortress that provided both protection and isolation. The terrain was rugged beyond description, with jagged ridges, deep valleys, and steep slopes that challenged even the most experienced mountain warfare specialists. Winter in this region was particularly brutal, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snowfall that could make movement virtually impossible for days at a time. But it was during the brief summer months, when the snow melted and revealed ancient smuggling routes used by fighters moving between Afghanistan and Pakistan, that the base saw its highest operational tempo.
Maria's new commanding officer, Major Patricia Hayes, was a career military physician who had specifically requested an experienced combat medic with special operations experience for her medical team. Major Hayes had reviewed Maria's service record and was impressed not just by her technical qualifications, but by the consistent pattern of commendations she had received for her performance under pressure.
"Santos," Major Hayes said during their initial meeting, "I'm going to be direct with you. This base supports some of the most challenging operations in the theater. The terrain is unforgiving, the enemy is experienced and determined, and the margin for error is essentially zero. I need medics who can function independently in small teams, make critical decisions under extreme pressure, and perform at the highest level even when everything around them is falling apart. Your record suggests you're that kind of medic, but I need to know if you're prepared for the level of responsibility that comes with this assignment." Maria's response was immediate and confident. "Ma'am, I understand the challenges and I'm prepared to meet them. I've trained extensively in high-altitude medicine and mountain rescue techniques since my last deployment. I'm confident in my ability to provide medical support for any operation that requires it."
Major Hayes nodded, satisfied with both the content and the delivery of Maria's response. "Excellent. You'll be assigned as the primary medic for special operations support. That means you'll be working directly with SEAL teams, Army Rangers, and other special operations units conducting missions in the surrounding mountains.
It's demanding work, but it's also the kind of assignment that separates truly exceptional medics from those who are merely competent. The special operations teams that Maria would be supporting were conducting a variety of missions in the region, from direct action raids against high-value targets to reconnaissance operations along the border with Pakistan. The common thread connecting all of these operations was the extreme physical and environmental challenges posed by the mountainous terrain and the high altitude. Maria threw herself into preparing for these challenges with the same determination that had characterized her entire military career. She spent hours in the base's makeshift gymnasium, focusing on cardiovascular conditioning and strength training specifically designed for mountain operations. She studied topographical maps of the region until she could navigate the major terrain features from memory.
Duchess says the motion is distant from heavy.
Most importantly, she worked closely with the special operations teams to understand their tactics, their equipment, and their expectations for medical support. It was during this preparation period that Maria was reintroduced to Senior Chief Richardson and his SEAL team, who had requested assignment to the same base after completing operations in another part of the country. Richardson remembered Maria from their previous encounter and had specifically asked for her to be assigned as the primary medic for his team's operations. "Santos," Richardson said when they met to discuss upcoming missions, "it's good to have you back. We've worked with other medics since our last deployment together, and while they were all competent, none of them understood our operational requirements the way you do. My team and I are looking forward to working with you again."
The SEAL team had changed somewhat since their last meeting.
Morrison and Torres were still part of the team, but Marcus Webb had been replaced by Petty Officer First Class Ryan Mitchell, a newer team member who was participating in his first deployment to Afghanistan.
Mitchell was eager to prove himself and had approached the deployment with the intense focus that characterized most new members of Special Operations units. Maria quickly established a working relationship with Mitchell, just as she had with the other team members. She found him to be technically proficient and dedicated, but also somewhat rigid in his thinking about tactics and procedures. This rigidity would later prove to be both an asset and a liability during the operation that would define Maria's military career. The mission that would test every aspect of Maria's training and character began as a routine reconnaissance operation. Intelligence reports had indicated increased activity along a mountain pass that was known to be used by fighters moving weapons and personnel between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Richardson's team was tasked with establishing an observation post that would allow them to monitor the pass and gather intelligence on enemy movements. The operation was planned to last 72 hours, with the team inserting via helicopter at a landing zone approximately 3 miles from their target observation post. The route to the observation post required crossing several ridges and navigating terrain that was challenging even by the standards of mountain warfare specialists. Maria's role in the operation was to accompany the team and provide medical support if needed, but also to serve as an additional set of eyes and ears during the surveillance phase of the mission. Her experience with previous special operations had taught her that medics often notice things that combat-focused soldiers might miss, simply because they were trained to observe and assess situations from a different perspective. The insertion went smoothly, with the helicopter dropping the 5-person team at the designated landing zone just before dawn. The early morning air was crisp and thin at the 8,000-foot elevation, and Maria could feel her heart rate increase slightly as her body adjusted to the reduced oxygen levels. Richardson quickly organized the team for movement to their objective, with Morrison taking point, Torres and Mitchell forming the middle of the formation, Maria following in the 4th position, and Richardson bringing up the rear. The formation was designed to provide maximum security while allowing for rapid movement across the challenging terrain. The first 2 miles of the movement went according to plan. The team navigated across rocky slopes and through narrow valleys, making good time despite the difficult terrain. Maria found herself impressed once again by the physical conditioning and mountain warfare skills of the SEAL team members. They moved with an efficiency and coordination that spoke to years of training and experience working together as a unit. But as they approached the final ridge before their observation post, the situation began to change rapidly. Mitchell, who was monitoring the team's radio communications, received a priority message from the base, indicating that intelligence reports suggested enemy activity in the immediate area had increased dramatically over the past several hours. Richardson called for a halt and gathered the team to assess the new information. The intelligence update indicated that a large group of fighters, possibly numbering more than 50 individuals, had been observed moving through the area where the team was operating. The enemy force was heavily armed and appeared to be conducting some type of coordinated operation.
This changes things significantly, Richardson told his team during the brief planning session. We have 2 options. We can abort the mission and return to the landing zone for extraction, or we can continue to the observation post with the understanding that we may be walking into a much more dangerous situation than originally anticipated.
The team's discussion was brief but thorough.
Morrison argued for continuing the mission, pointing out that the intelligence they were tasked with gathering was critical for understanding enemy operations in the region. Torres and Mitchell agreed, with Torres adding that the team was well positioned to defend themselves if they encountered enemy forces.
Maria listened to the discussion without participating, understanding that as a support member of the team, the tactical decision was not hers to make. But she also conducted her own assessment of the medical implications of the decision to continue. If the team encountered enemy forces, the likelihood of casualties would be significantly higher than during a routine reconnaissance operation. She mentally reviewed her medical supplies and confirmed that she was prepared to treat multiple serious casualties if necessary.
Richardson made the decision to continue with the mission, but with modified procedures that would reduce the team's exposure to enemy observation and potential ambush. The team would move more slowly and carefully, with increased emphasis on stealth and concealment. If they encountered enemy forces, they would attempt to avoid contact rather than engage, unless engagement was absolutely necessary for their survival. The final mile to the observation post proved to be the most challenging terrain the team had faced.
The route required climbing nearly straight up a rocky slope that rose more than 1,000 feet in elevation. The loose rock and steep angle made every step treacherous, and the thin air made the physical exertion even more demanding.
Maria found herself struggling more than she had expected with the climb. Her cardiovascular conditioning was excellent by any normal standard,
but the combination of high altitude, heavy equipment, and the stress of operating in potentially hostile territory was taking a toll on her endurance. She forced herself to maintain the pace set by the team, knowing that falling behind could compromise the entire mission. As they neared the crest of the ridge, Morrison suddenly signaled for the team to halt and take cover. From his position at point, he had observed movement in the valley beyond the ridge that suggested the presence of enemy forces in the immediate vicinity of their planned observation post. Richardson moved forward to join Morrison and conduct his own assessment of the situation. What they observed confirmed their worst fears. A large group of fighters, numbering at least 40 individuals, had established what appeared to be a temporary camp directly adjacent to the location where the team had planned to establish their observation post. The enemy force was heavily armed with assault rifles, machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenades. More concerning, they appeared to be conducting some type of training exercise which suggested a level of organization and preparation that was unusual for the typically loose networks of fighters that operated in the region. Richardson quickly gathered his team to assess their options. The original mission was clearly impossible to accomplish given the enemy presence at their objective. The question now was how to extract safely, while gathering as much intelligence as possible about the enemy force they had discovered.
The team's position on the ridge provided excellent observation of the enemy camp, but it also left them exposed to detection if the enemy conducted any type of security patrol in their direction. Richardson decided that the team would establish a temporary observation post in their current location, gather as much intelligence as possible over the next several hours, and then withdraw to the landing zone for extraction. The plan seemed sound, and for the first 2 hours of observation, everything proceeded according to the modified mission parameters. The team was able to gather detailed intelligence about the enemy force, including weapons inventory, personnel count, and apparent command structure.
Maria found herself fascinated by the intelligence-gathering process and impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism of the SEAL team's approach to their work. But as the afternoon wore on, the situation began to deteriorate rapidly. Mitchell, who was monitoring the team's radio communications, reported that other units in the area were encountering enemy forces and that a significant operation appeared to be developing across the entire region. More concerning, Morrison observed several groups of enemy fighters moving through the valleys below their position, apparently conducting some type of coordinated movement that suggested they might be aware of the American presence in the area. Richardson made the decision to abort the observation mission and begin immediate withdrawal to the landing zone. The team quickly gathered their equipment and prepared to move, but as they began to descend from the ridge, disaster struck with shocking suddenness. Mitchell, who was moving in the second position in the withdrawal formation, stepped on what appeared to be solid rock but turned out to be a thin layer of stone covering a crevice in the mountain. The rock gave way under his weight, and he fell approximately 20 feet into a narrow gully that was hidden from view by the surrounding terrain. The fall itself might not have been catastrophic under different circumstances, but Mitchell landed awkwardly on his left leg, and the sound of his femur fracturing was audible to the entire team. The injury was immediately obvious as being severe, with Mitchell's leg bent at an unnatural angle and his face contorted in pain. Maria immediately moved to Mitchell's position and began her medical assessment. What she found was worse than she had initially feared. Mitchell had suffered a compound fracture of his left femur, with the bone protruding through the skin and causing significant bleeding. He also appeared to have injured his back in the fall, though the extent of that injury was difficult to determine given his other trauma. The medical situation was challenging enough, but the tactical situation made everything infinitely more complicated. The sound of Mitchell's fall and his initial cries of pain had echoed across the valley, potentially alerting any enemy forces in the area to the team's presence. More immediately concerning, Mitchell's position at the bottom of the gully made it extremely difficult for the rest of the team to provide security while Maria treated his injuries. Richardson assessed the situation quickly and made a series of rapid decisions that would determine the outcome of the entire operation. The team could not remain in their current position for an extended period without risking detection and engagement with superior enemy forces. But Mitchell's injuries were too severe for him to be moved without extensive medical treatment that could take hours to complete. The solution Richardson decided upon was tactically sound, but placed an enormous burden on Maria. The rest of the team would withdraw to a more defensible position approximately half a mile away, where they could provide overwatch and security while Maria treated Mitchell's injuries. Once Mitchell was stabilized for movement, the team would return to assist with his evacuation. Maria understood the logic of Richardson's plan, but she also understood what it meant for her personally. She would be alone with a severely injured soldier in hostile territory, responsible not only for providing complex medical treatment under field conditions, but also for maintaining security and communications while she worked. The rest of the team quickly departed, leaving Maria alone with Mitchell in the narrow gully where he had fallen. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming,
after the constant activity and communication that had characterized the team's movement throughout the day.
Maria forced herself to focus on the immediate medical priorities while simultaneously maintaining awareness of the security situation around them. Mitchell's pain was severe, and she administered morphine to help manage it while she worked on addressing his other injuries. The compound fracture of his femur was the most immediate life-threatening injury, both because of the blood loss it was causing and because of the risk of infection from the open wound. Maria cleaned and dressed the wound as thoroughly as possible under field conditions, then used an improvised splint to immobilize the leg and reduce the risk of further injury. But as she worked, Maria became increasingly aware that Mitchell's condition was more serious than she had initially assessed. His blood pressure was dropping, suggesting possible internal bleeding from injuries that were not immediately visible. His responses to her questions were becoming less coherent, indicating either significant blood loss or a possible head injury from the fall.
More concerning from a tactical perspective, Maria could hear the sounds of vehicles and human activity in the valley below their position. The enemy forces that Richardson's team had been observing appeared to be moving in their direction, possibly in response to the sounds of Mitchell's accident.
Maria faced a decision that no amount of training could have fully prepared her for. Mitchell needed immediate evacuation to a medical facility with surgical capabilities, but moving him in his current condition could cause additional injuries that might prove fatal. At the same time, remaining in their current position with enemy forces potentially closing in on them was equally dangerous. She made the decision to continue treating Mitchell's injuries while simultaneously preparing for the possibility that they might need to move quickly. Using her radio, she contacted Richardson and provided a detailed medical assessment of Mitchell's condition. "Chief, Mitchell's condition is critical," she reported in the calm, professional tone that she had learned to maintain even under extreme stress. "He has a compound femur fracture with significant blood loss, possible internal bleeding, and declining consciousness. He needs surgical intervention as soon as possible, but moving him without proper immobilization could cause additional injuries." Richardson's response reflected the difficult tactical situation the team was facing. "Santos, we've observed increased enemy activity moving in your direction. We estimate you have maybe 30 minutes before they reach your position. Can you stabilize Mitchell for immediate evacuation in that time frame?" Maria looked at Mitchell, who was drifting in and out of consciousness despite the pain medication she had administered. His injuries were severe enough that rapid evacuation could save his life but could also cause additional trauma that might prove fatal. On the other hand, waiting for ideal conditions was no longer an option given the approaching enemy forces. "Negative, Chief," she responded. "Mitchell's injuries are too severe for immediate movement. I need at least 2 hours to properly stabilize him, and even then, evacuation across this terrain is going to be extremely dangerous for him." The radio was silent for several long seconds before Richardson's voice returned. "Santos, I'm going to have to order you to prepare Mitchell for immediate evacuation. The tactical situation is deteriorating rapidly, and we cannot maintain our current positions much longer." Maria understood the order and the reasoning behind it, but she also understood what it meant for Mitchell's chances of survival. Moving him before his injuries were properly stabilized would likely cause additional bleeding and could result in his death before they reached medical facilities. It was at this moment that Maria made the decision that would define her military career and change her life forever. Instead of acknowledging Richardson's order, she made a counter-proposal that stunned everyone who heard it. "Chief, I have an alternative plan," she said. "You extract with the rest of the team immediately. I'll remain with Mitchell, continue treating his injuries, and extract with him when he's stable enough to be moved safely."
The radio silence that followed her proposal seemed to last forever. Richardson's voice, when it finally came back over the radio, carried a mixture of admiration and concern that Maria had never heard from him before.
"Santos, I understand what you're proposing, and I respect your commitment to your patient, but you understand what you're suggesting, don't you? You're talking about staying in hostile territory, alone with a critically wounded soldier, with enemy forces closing in on your position." Maria's response was immediate and unwavering. "Yes, Chief, I understand exactly what I'm proposing. Mitchell's injuries are too severe for immediate evacuation. Moving him now will likely kill him. I can keep him alive if I have the time to treat him properly, but I need you and the team to extract immediately so that you don't become casualties yourselves."
What followed was the most intense tactical discussion Maria had ever participated in. Richardson and his team faced an impossible choice: abandon one of their teammates and their medic in hostile territory, or risk the entire team in an extraction attempt that might result in multiple casualties and no guarantee of success.
The discussion took place over encrypted radio communications, with Maria providing detailed medical updates on Mitchell's condition while Richardson coordinated with base headquarters to explore alternative options.
The possibility of immediate helicopter extraction was ruled out due to enemy air defense assets in the area. Ground reinforcement would take hours to organize and deploy, time that the team didn't have given the approaching enemy forces. During this crucial planning period, Maria continued working on Mitchell's injuries with a focus and intensity that surprised even her.
She had entered what she would later describe as a zone of complete concentration, where every action was deliberate and every decision was made with crystal clarity about its consequences. Mitchell's condition had stabilized somewhat thanks to Maria's treatment, but he remained critically injured and in need of surgical intervention.
More concerning, he was beginning to show signs of shock from blood loss despite Maria's efforts to control his bleeding and maintain his fluid levels. Santos. Richardson's voice came over the radio with the tone of finality that indicated a decision had been made. Headquarters has approved emergency extraction for the team. We're moving to the primary landing zone immediately. You and Mitchell will be extracted by helicopter as soon as weather and enemy activity permit. Until then, you're on your own. Maria acknowledged the transmission and understood what it meant. She was now alone in hostile territory with a critically wounded soldier, responsible for keeping him alive until rescue arrived. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time in her military career, she was operating completely independently, with the authority to make whatever decisions she believed were necessary to accomplish her mission. The next several hours tested every aspect of Maria's medical training and personal character. Mitchell's condition continued to fluctuate, with periods of stability followed by episodes of declining consciousness and vital signs that indicated his body was struggling to cope with his injuries. Maria found herself not just treating Mitchell's physical injuries, but also serving as his lifeline to consciousness and hope. She talked to him constantly, keeping him awake when his body wanted to slip into unconsciousness, encouraging him when pain and fear threatened to overwhelm his determination to survive.
Mitchell listened to me, she said, during one particularly difficult period when his blood pressure had dropped dangerously low.
You're going to get through this.
I've treated injuries like yours before, and with proper medical care, you're going to make a full recovery. But I need you to stay with me. I need you to keep fighting. Mitchell's response was weak but determined. Santos, I don't know if I can do this. The pain is getting worse and I feel like I'm losing the fight. You can do this, Maria replied with absolute conviction.
You're a Navy SEAL, which means you've already proven that you can accomplish things that most people think are impossible. This is just another challenge, and you have the training and the mental toughness to overcome it.
But even as she worked to keep Mitchell stable and conscious, Maria was becoming increasingly aware of the tactical situation developing around them. The sounds of enemy activity in the surrounding area had increased throughout the day, and she could now hear vehicles and human voices close enough to suggest that enemy forces were conducting systematic searches of the area where she and Mitchell were hidden. As darkness fell on their first night alone in the mountains, Maria faced a new set of challenges. The temperature dropped dramatically, threatening hypothermia for Mitchell, who was already weakened by blood loss and shock. She used her own body heat and every piece of available clothing and equipment to keep him warm, while simultaneously monitoring his vital signs and adjusting his medical treatment as needed. The darkness also brought increased enemy activity. Maria could see lights moving through the valley below their position, and the sounds of vehicles and radio communications suggested that a large-scale search operation was underway. She realized that their position, while providing some concealment during daylight hours, would become increasingly difficult to maintain if enemy forces expanded their search to include the higher elevations. It was during the early morning hours of their second day that Maria received the radio communication that changed everything. Weather conditions had improved enough to allow helicopter operations, but the increased enemy presence in the area made extraction from their current location impossible. Santos, this is base headquarters. The voice on the radio belonged to Major Hayes, Maria's commanding officer.
We've identified an alternative extraction site approximately 8 miles from your current position. The site is at a higher elevation, beyond the range of enemy small arms and rocket-propelled grenades, and can be secured for helicopter extraction.
Well...
Maria looked at the map coordinates for the extraction site and felt her heart sink. 8 miles across the mountain terrain between their current position and the extraction site would be challenging for a healthy, uninjured person carrying normal equipment.
For someone carrying a critically wounded soldier who could not walk or assist in his own movement, it seemed virtually impossible. "Ma'am," Maria responded, "Mitchell's condition is still critical. He cannot walk or assist in his own movement,
and the terrain between our position and the extraction site would require carrying him over some extremely difficult ground.
Santos, I understand the medical challenges, but the tactical situation is deteriorating rapidly. Enemy forces are conducting systematic searches of the area around your position, and we estimate you have 12 hours, maybe less, before they locate you.
The extraction site I've identified is the only option for getting you and Mitchell out of there alive. Maria studied the topographical map of the route to the extraction site and conducted her own assessment of the challenges it would present. The route included crossing 3 major ridges, navigating several deep valleys, and climbing nearly 2,000 feet in elevation over the course of 8 miles. The terrain was rocky and unstable, with numerous opportunities for injury even under ideal conditions. More challenging from a medical perspective, the movement would require carrying Mitchell for the entire distance.
At nearly 200 pounds of body weight plus equipment, he would represent a load that was more than twice Maria's own body weight. The physical demands of carrying that load over 8 miles of mountain terrain seemed beyond human capability.
But as Maria considered the alternatives, she realized that there were no other options. Remaining in their current position would almost certainly result in capture or death when enemy forces eventually found them.
The extraction site that headquarters had identified represented their only chance for survival. Regardless of how impossible the journey might seem, Maria made the decision that would define the rest of her military career and establish her as a legend within the special operations community.
She would attempt to carry Mitchell to the extraction site, regardless of the physical challenges involved. The preparation for the movement took several hours.
Maria needed to stabilize Mitchell's injuries sufficiently to withstand the stress of being carried over rough terrain for an extended period. She also needed to modify her equipment to allow her to carry Mitchell's weight while maintaining enough mobility to navigate the challenging terrain.
Using materials from her medical kit and Mitchell's equipment, Maria constructed an improvised carrying system that would allow her to bear his weight across her shoulders and back while keeping his injured leg immobilized. The system was crude but functional, designed to distribute his weight as evenly as possible while providing her with enough freedom of movement to maintain her balance on uneven terrain.
Mitchell was conscious and aware enough to understand what Maria was proposing, and his initial reaction was one of disbelief.
Santos, you can't carry me 8 miles through these mountains.
I outweigh you by almost 100 pounds, and the terrain is impossible even for someone who isn't injured. Maria's response reflected the determination that had characterized her entire military career.
Mitchell, I've carried heavier loads in training and I've navigated worse terrain than this. More importantly, this is what I trained for. This is why I became a medic. You're my patient, and my job is to get you to safety, whatever it takes.
The journey began in the pre-dawn hours of their second day in the mountains. Maria had calculated that the movement would take approximately 12 to 14 hours, assuming they could maintain an average pace of slightly more than half a mile per hour.
The pace seemed impossibly slow, but Maria knew that attempting to move faster would result in exhaustion that could leave them stranded partway to their objective. The first mile of the movement established the pattern that would define the entire journey. Maria would carry Mitchell for approximately 100 meters, then set him down to rest while she assessed his condition and adjusted his medical treatment as needed. The rest periods also allowed her to recover from the physical strain of carrying his weight while planning the route for the next segment of their movement.
Mitchell's weight seemed to increase with each segment of the journey. What had felt manageable during the first few hundred meters became progressively more challenging as Maria's muscles fatigued, and her body began to feel the accumulated stress of carrying a load that was well beyond normal human capabilities.
But Maria had discovered something about herself during those first few hours of movement that she had never known before. When everything else was stripped away, when survival depended entirely on her individual determination and physical capabilities, she found reserves of strength and endurance that she hadn't known existed. The terrain proved to be every bit as challenging as the topographical map had suggested. Rocky slopes required careful foot placement to avoid falls that could injure both Maria and Mitchell.
Loose gravel made every step treacherous, and the high altitude meant that even moderate exertion left Maria breathing heavily and struggling to maintain her pace. But the most difficult challenge was psychological.
During the long hours of carrying Mitchell across terrain that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of them, Maria found herself fighting against the voice in her mind that insisted what she was attempting was impossible. The rational part of her brain provided constant calculations about distance remaining, rate of movement, and physical capabilities that all suggested she could not accomplish what she had set out to do.
Mitchell, despite his injuries and pain medication, seemed to understand the internal battle that Maria was fighting. During their rest periods, he would encourage her with the same determination that she had used to keep him conscious and fighting during their first night in the mountains.
Santos, he said during one particularly difficult period when Maria was struggling with fatigue and doubt, I've seen a lot of tough people in my career, but I've never seen anyone with the kind of determination you're showing right now. You're going to get us both out of here, and when you do, this is going to be a story that people in the special operations community tell for years to come.
The encouragement helped, but Maria knew that inspiration alone would not be sufficient to complete the journey. She needed to find ways to conserve her energy and manage the physical strain of carrying Mitchell's weight that would allow her to continue moving for the many hours that remained. She began experimenting with different carrying positions and techniques, looking for methods that would distribute Mitchell's weight more efficiently and reduce the stress on particular muscle groups. She also began using terrain features to her advantage, looking for routes that minimized elevation changes and avoided the most treacherous footing. Most importantly, she learned to break the journey into smaller, more manageable segments. Instead of focusing on the 8 miles that remained to the extraction site, she focused on reaching the next ridge, the next valley, or the next terrain feature that was visible ahead of them.
As the day progressed and the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maria became increasingly aware of the pursuit that was developing behind them. She could occasionally hear helicopters in the distance, and the sound of vehicles in the valleys below suggested that enemy forces were conducting an intensive search for their location. The knowledge that they were being hunted added urgency to their movement, but it also provided additional motivation for Maria to push through the physical pain and exhaustion that were becoming constant companions. Capture was not an option, both because of what it would mean for their own survival and because of the intelligence value that their capture would represent to enemy forces. By midday, Maria had covered approximately 4 miles of the 8-mile journey to the extraction site. The pace was slightly better than she had originally calculated, but she was also beginning to feel the accumulated effects of carrying Mitchell's weight for 6 continuous hours. Her shoulders ached constantly from the improvised harness system, her legs trembled with fatigue during each rest period, and she found herself needing longer recovery times between each segment of movement. More concerning, she was beginning to experience signs of dehydration and heat exhaustion that could compromise her ability to continue the journey. Mitchell's condition had remained relatively stable throughout the movement, though the stress of being carried over rough terrain was clearly taking a toll on his injured body. His pain levels had increased despite the medication Maria was administering, and she was concerned about the possibility of additional injuries from the unavoidable jostling that came with being carried across uneven terrain. During one of their rest periods, approximately halfway to the extraction site, Maria conducted a thorough reassessment of both her own condition and Mitchell's injuries. What she discovered was both encouraging and concerning. Mitchell's vital signs had remained stable, and there was no indication of additional bleeding from his primary injuries. His pain was manageable with the medication she was providing, and his mental status remained clear and alert. From a medical perspective, the movement was not causing additional harm to his condition, but Maria's own physical condition was becoming a source of concern. The sustained physical exertion of carrying Mitchell's weight was pushing her body beyond limits she had never tested before. Her heart rate remained elevated even during rest periods. Her hands were beginning to shake from fatigue, and she was struggling to maintain the focus and concentration needed to navigate the increasingly difficult terrain. She faced a decision that would determine whether they would reach the extraction site successfully or become casualties of their own rescue attempt. She could continue at their current pace and risk complete physical exhaustion before reaching their objective, or she could attempt to increase their pace and risk injury or collapse from overexertion. Maria chose a third option that demonstrated the tactical thinking she had learned from working with special operations teams. She would modify their movement pattern to take advantage of terrain features that would allow her to conserve energy while maintaining their progress toward the extraction site.
The new plan involved using gravity and momentum to assist their movement wherever possible. Instead of fighting directly uphill over ridges, she would navigate around terrain features when possible, accepting longer distances in exchange for more manageable gradients.
She would also take advantage of any opportunity to rest in shade or shelter that would help her recover from heat exhaustion. The modified approach proved effective over the next several hours. Maria found that she could maintain a slightly faster pace while experiencing less overall fatigue. More importantly, the tactical approach to navigation helped her maintain confidence in her ability to complete the journey successfully. As afternoon turned to evening, Maria and Mitchell reached the final major obstacle before the extraction site. A steep ridge rose nearly 800 feet above their current position, representing the most challenging single climb of their entire journey. The slope was covered with loose rock and offered few opportunities for rest or recovery during the ascent. Maria stood at the base of the ridge, looking up at the terrain she would need to cross while carrying Mitchell's full weight, and felt a moment of doubt that threatened to overwhelm her determination. The climb looked impossible, especially given her current state of exhaustion, and the fading daylight that would make navigation even more difficult.
Mitchell seemed to sense her hesitation and spoke with a strength in his voice that belied his injured condition. "Santos, you've already accomplished something that nobody thought was possible. You've carried me more than 6 miles through terrain that would challenge a pack animal. This last mile doesn't change anything except that it gets us home."
His words reminded Maria of something that she had temporarily forgotten in her focus on the immediate physical challenges. She wasn't just attempting to accomplish a difficult rescue mission.
She was proving that determination and character could overcome physical limitations that others considered insurmountable. With renewed determination, Maria began the final ascent toward the extraction site.
The climb was every bit as difficult as it had appeared, requiring careful foot placement and constant attention to balance while carrying Mitchell's weight, but she found that each step forward reinforced her confidence that she could complete what she had started. The last quarter mile of the climb was completed in darkness, with Maria navigating by compass and the distant sound of helicopters that indicated the extraction team was waiting for them at the designated site. The sound of rescue aircraft provided additional motivation during the most difficult part of the entire journey. When Maria finally crested the ridge and saw the lights of the extraction team in the distance, she felt a combination of exhaustion, relief, and pride that defied description.
She had accomplished something that military training manuals would have classified as impossible, and she had done it through nothing more than determination and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The helicopter extraction was completed without incident, and Mitchell was transported to a medical facility where he received the surgical treatment his injuries required. His recovery was complete and he returned to active duty with the SEAL teams within 6 months of the incident. But the story of Maria Santos and her 8-mile rescue of a wounded Navy SEAL became legend within the military community.
Her actions that day challenged every assumption about physical limitations, gender roles in combat, and the power of individual determination to overcome seemingly impossible circumstances. Maria was awarded the Silver Star for her actions, one of the highest decorations for valor that can be awarded to American military personnel.
But more importantly, she had established herself as a symbol of the fact that heroism has nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the size of someone's heart and their commitment to the people who depend on them. The young woman who had once been questioned about whether she was too small to serve in combat roles had proven that true strength comes from within, and that the most important battles are often won not by the biggest or strongest fighters, but by those who refuse to give up, when giving up would be the easiest option.
Maria's story continues to inspire military personnel around the world, serving as a reminder that courage comes in all sizes and that the most unlikely heroes are often the ones who accomplish the most extraordinary things. Her legacy is not just what she accomplished on a single day in the mountains of Afghanistan, but what her example continues to teach about the unlimited potential of human determination and the power of refusing to accept that something cannot be done simply because it has never been done before.